Thanks for taking the time to join us for This Week in Evansville. We've got a lot of great programs coming up, but I'm really excited to get in finally to talking to gubernatorial candidates because this is a really important election that's on the way for Hoosiers. And I'm such a believer that before you go and cast that vote, that you need to learn something more about the candidates than the mailer that you got in your mailbox yesterday, or the negative ads that you see streaming or on television. And it's really about getting to know the person as well as what they're going to be able to do for our state. So I'm really pleased to have Suzanne Crouch with me. Suzanne is a lieutenant governor currently and running for governorship of the state of Indiana. And she's from Evansville. I don't know that there's anybody who doesn't realize that, but great to have you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Johnny. We've been trying to do this forever, and we were talking before the program that, my goodness, our friendship goes back to the early 90s.
Yes.
Crazy.
Walking around the track for Relay for Life at Central High School. And I don't even know how many years ago that was. And we date ourselves if we get the number of years. So we don't want to go too far down that trail. But Suzanne, this is really a big race, and you've got a lot of competition in this. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, and before we get to those things that separate you on the political end of things, I want to talk just a little bit about personal life, because I think it's important for people to know the person as well as their stand on issues. So let me just start off with, you and I share something in common in that we both have kids who wound up with addiction issues, and for me, it's my son. For you, your daughter, and that's a hard fight.
Well, it is. Because it doesn't just affect that person. It affects the entire family, and it affects friends. It affects so many people, and none of us are immune to it. I became, really interested in trying to do something for those that struggle during COVID. When I saw how it was affecting, that isolation and fear and uncertainty and anxiety was affecting all of us, particularly our children. And while I have grown up with family members that have struggled, my mother struggled with mental illness and with anxiety. My older brother, Larry, he was an alcoholic. He died, drank himself to death, quite honestly. My younger sister, Nancy, died in her early 20s by suicide. And then our daughter, Courtney, is 16 years sober and bipolar. So while I have had those experiences as a family member, I really wasn't familiar with kind of the profession and, what we're doing to help those that are struggling and what can we do better. And so during COVID, when I saw what was going on, I said, I've got to do something. One of the bad things from COVID is we all suffered a mental health crisis.
We did.
Fear, anxiety, depression, isolation, loneliness. One of the good things is we all went through that. So I think today there's more of an awareness and a sense of urgency that we've got to do something to help them. And it's because COVID, as a result of COVID, we've seen a 20% increase in anxiety and depression among the population.
Wow.
But a 60% increase among young people. I mean, suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people, and they are the future of Indiana. And it's why, if I'm governor and we ever find ourselves in a situation like we did with COVID, there'll be no mask mandates or lockdowns because of what it's done to all of us, including our children. And it's why I co-founded the Indiana Mental Health Roundtable, is to try to bring awareness and to help those that are struggling. So,
for people who 16 years ago in your case, and more like 25 years ago in my case, when you suddenly discover that this person that you really love and care about has issues, whether it's depression or whether it's addiction, there are connections in those things. But where do you go for help? And I know you didn't know what was available in the state of Indiana to help your daughter out.
Right.
I didn't know in my son's case what to do. And for anybody who is dealing with that in your home, what I want to tell you is, first of all, find help for yourself before you can do this. Take the steps that need to be taken for your loved one. You've got to be healthy yourself, because the struggle is really hard. When you're trying to get that person, if you try to move an addict into recovery, that's a fight. And you have to be prepared for that. I found a group of people in Al-Anon meetings that were just amazing. And they were my lifeline during the time going through those difficulties. And, one of them gave me a rosary to keep in my pocket. And she said, anytime that you feel alone, she said, you reach in your pocket and you just squeeze that rosary. Well, I squeezed that thing to death, because I felt so alone. There's a hopelessness that comes with that, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when our loved ones, regardless of whether it's our siblings or our parents or our children, when we learn that they are actually addicted or that they're struggling with mental illness, we tend to try to figure out what we could have done differently. What did I do that contributed to this? How did I cause this? And, it's a journey that we all have to go on, but none of us are to blame.
Right.
What we have to focus on is how do we get better, and how do we take care of ourselves, to your point, but also take care of that person that's struggling. So it's a journey. It's a journey that affects the whole family unit. And it's, I felt hopeless at the beginning. And it was different when it was my mother and my brother and my sister than when it's my child. Then it's a totally different feeling,
Right.
and that failure, that sense of failure, that sense of hopelessness, is, I think, just a natural stage that you go through before you finally say, we got to do what we got to do to try to help.
Well, so we know that on a private basis, there are things that are available in the community that, unfortunately, people aren't very aware of. But, like, to give you an example, the Gathering Church downtown, Ray Brown's the pastor there, and his entire mission has been based on addiction recovery. And they do Celebrate Recovery classes in the church, and you go in there and there's all these tattooed up, addicts hanging around that church, but they've got hearts of gold, and they go out in the community. And when Jelly Roll was playing at the Ford Center in downtown Evansville, they were out there doing baptisms out street side.
Oh my gosh!
So there are people who are doing it. The problem is that people aren't really aware of it, and then being able to replicate those things. I mean, something like the Gathering Church happens organically, and being able to replicate is hard. But is there more that the state can do?
Well, I tell you, the state has taken an important step forward, and that was in the 23 budget session. We actually passed a bill, Senate Enrolled Act number 1, to establish the 988 suicide hotline. And that provides the infrastructure, but also in the budget funding for that. Now, I did something that lieutenant governors never do, and that is I testified on behalf of that bill in the House and the Senate, because I felt it was absolutely critical that we in Indiana have a number, 988, that people in crisis can call, or even if you just have a question, you can call and talk to professionals who will then respond to you and get you connected to the right services. And if you are in crisis, there is a mobile response team that'll go to where you are and get services to you and get you connected. We have to do more of those kinds of things. We have to do more to get more therapists and more psychiatrists in our state, because we are woefully underrepresented. And when someone's in crisis, they need to see someone now. They can't wait 2 or 3 months to get in. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we've taken an important step forward. And here in Evansville, with the Stone Family Health Center, and then the, Rosemary O'Daniel and Bill Stone, child advocacy, psychiatrists, child and adolescent psychiatry, those are initiatives that are really making a difference for young people and in bipolar, realm. But then U of E, they've established the mental health and wellness clinic and the Emily M. Young, assessment center to be able to provide that help to the community that is there in the U of E area. So while the state's taking important action, locals are also taking important action. And there is that sense of collaboration. Now's the time we need to do something because people are aware of it. When I speak to groups about mental illness and addiction, and I'll say, if you yourself have struggled, or you have a loved one, or a family member, someone close to you, not someone you deal with professionally, raise your hand, and I will tell you, just about everybody in the room raises their hand. Because, we aren't perfect people. We're children of God, and we're created in the likeness of God. But we also know that we are not perfect. And so we have to figure out how we can help each other.
Well, and I guess it really boils down to resources and figuring out what we can afford to do, right? Because dollars dictate how far you can go with something. But there's such a need. And I'm glad to see that the state taking steps. That's very important. But you also bring out the local aspect. And for everybody watching, understand this about Suzanne. Suzanne is from Evansville, all right? And she's been in Indianapolis as lieutenant governor for over 7 years now. And but you still come home on the weekends.
Every weekend.
You got a deal worked out with your husband on that.
Every weekend I come home and I don't feel sorry for him. He loves the arrangement because I'm not there during the week to tell him what to do and how to do it.
But you've stayed connected, and I've heard you talk about this before, about staying connected to Southern Indiana, because this end of the state has always had this kind of
complex that we're getting neglected, and I think to some extent we have. Now, I will tell you what, I-69 has helped to kind of bridge that gap, when I was a state rep, I was a co-author on the bill that established the funding for I-69, and that has been a real game changer. And today, the Southwest Indiana region was one of 6 regions that received $45 million in ready grant money.
Wow.
And that's on top of the $50 million they received 2 years ago. And that's on top of the $42 million they received in 2016. So I think because of the leadership, but also because of the collaboration, the connection, the caring community that we have here, we are being recognized. And as governor, I'll make sure we get our fair share and then some.
All right. So, hometown girl, she's doing great. She comes back home every weekend. Will you continue that as governor?
Well, I believe that if I'm elected governor, that I will be living up in Indianapolis in the governor's residence, and my husband will have to come up there. But eventually we will be back in Evansville.
Right. Okay, good. Now let's talk about because your ads, you've been covering the mental health issue in your most recent TV commercials that I've seen. Prior to that, the campaign was on Axe the Tax.
Axe the Tax. Yes, we're going to.
So what is the current, how much extra revenue does the state of Indiana generate now?
Well, let me, if I may, just take a moment to kind of explain the whole Axe the Tax concept.
Okay.
As governor, I will lead the fight to eliminate the state income tax. And like you said, we've got a name for it, Axe the Tax. Because I'll tell you what, Johnny, I have traveled Indiana, and Hoosiers are hurting today. I mean, they're struggling under the cost of inflation and cost of living, Bidenomics. Today, it costs $11,400 more than it did 3 years ago just to meet basic household needs.
Wow.
So Hoosiers are struggling, and we have an opportunity for the average Hoosier to give them $2,000 of their money back every year. Now, what do you do when I give you money? You're going to put it in the economy, right? Which grows other revenues. And so I will tell you, my opponents say, oh, we can't do it. It's a gimmick, And what they're really saying is, Government needs more of your money and you need less, you know. So it can't happen overnight. It has to be phased in. We have to have triggers in place to protect against economic downturn. But as former vice chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, as former auditor of state, we can do it if we limit government growth, if we end wasteful government spending and we find efficiencies in government, we can absolutely eliminate the income tax, giving you money, but also helps to allow small businesses to grow. And then when we become a no income tax state, it attracts people to Indiana because where are they moving to today? Tennessee, Texas, Florida, South Dakota, all no income tax states who, by the way, their GDP and population is growing greater than Indiana. So we can absolutely do it. We just have to control how much we spend. Because in the past decade, we've increased government spending at the state level by 50%. Before we passed the budget, so I'm getting to your answer. Before we passed the budget in 2023, we had a $6 billion surplus. So we held $2.9 billion back as our surplus. The other $3.1 billion we put into government spending. Now, not all bad. We paid down on debt. We paid down on pensions. We paid cash for capital projects. But if eliminating the income tax is a priority, we would have put all that money towards that, and we'd be getting that much closer to it. So I'm saying as we move forward, when we have years where we have excess revenues and surpluses, let's eliminate that income tax.
Because there has been some talk, and this during the legislative session, about signs of economic downturn, that revenues were soft for a few months, that and that the unemployment numbers were not stable. So will those things impact being able to access?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I said we have to have triggers in place to protect against economic downturns. Because if we don't reach a certain, if we don't protect our operating revenues, then we get in trouble and we have to cut services. And we don't want to cut services. We just want to limit how much we allow government to grow. So in the 25 budget session, here's what we would do if I'm governor. We take our $44.5 billion base. That's what we passed in 2023 was $44.5 billion budget. So we let it grow maybe at the rate of inflation or maybe the cost of living. Pick some factor. And then if revenues come in over that operating revenues, then we put that surplus towards eliminating the income tax. If not, we don't do it. Other states are doing it. Kentucky's doing it. Iowa's doing it. And in fact, Iowa's cut their income tax rate by 5 percentage points since 2018. So other states are doing it. We can't be left behind. We need to be a leader. And the Tax Foundation, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., says that Indiana is 10th in the country for our overall tax environment. So we're not bad. 7 of the states ahead of us have no sales or income tax. So we have got to look at how do we give people more money back, helping them at a time when they need it? How do we allow small businesses to grow? And then how do we attract people to Indiana? Because we need workers, even though we're growing our economy, we have 100,000 jobs that are unfilled in Indiana. So we need to keep bringing people to Indiana. That's how we grow our economy.
And that's probably the rub right there is how do we attract that new talent into the state?
Well, they pay less taxes and they'll come.
Okay. So that can be a big part of the picture there.
Yeah.
So, we eliminate the tax. Let's then talk about economic development for a second here. Because there's been a lot of talk during this campaign and during the legislative session, it kept popping up about the economic development project that they're looking at for Lebanon and the water coming from West Lafayette and so on down the line. And there's been quite a little bit of turmoil over
It's called Boone County Boondoggle.
Okay. So how do we, I understand there's this pivot point that we hit somewhere, right? Where the state government is doing enough to promote economic growth, but not so much that we're tipping the scales and we're subsidizing this development in a way that we don't.
Certain parts of the state.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. Our state has had a very top-down paternalistic, state-driven economic development approach for the past 25 years. And as governor, I would look at empowering and building capacity among our local and regional economic development organizations so that they can be true partners with the state as we go after these jobs and these big investments in Indiana. Because we have not focused on our local and regional economic development organizations for the past 25 years. It's time to build capacity with them, because when you look at the real powerhouse states, the ones that are really pulling in the economic development, they have a strong local and a strong state organizations. And that way, no part of Indiana is left behind. Otherwise, the state's in charge, and then they pick the winners and losers. And that's not fair, because everybody should have a seat at the table and everybody should be able to participate in the success of Indiana. So I would look at that. And then, of course, with the LEAP district up in Lebanon, they moved forward, establishing this economic development district that is going to take huge amounts of waters without the state having a water plant in place. So that's why we now are looking at billions of dollars to pipe water in. Why did we not locate that development near a water source, as opposed to just putting it somewhere where you don't have the assets? So as governor, I'll make sure we have statewide water plans and we have statewide energy plans. We actually know where our resources are and we know where we need to locate. So we pick and choose where people are and where developments are based upon what the assets are available.
See, because I see myself as kind of just the average person with limited knowledge of how it all works. But when I look at, we got to build this pipeline, we got to take millions of gallons a day from point A to point B, to me, the thing that makes sense is we develop where that water source is, not take from it. And what are the long-term implications of taking millions of gallons a day from point A to point B? So, average folks look at some of these things and they just have no idea why we would even think about it.
Yeah, well, I think people are smarter than sometimes people at the state give them credit, because they can cut through and see the actual logic to something, or the lack of logic. And in this case, I think you're absolutely correct. We should have located these developments in these districts where the resources are, not trying to figure out after the fact how to get the resources to where the development is. So, yeah.
What's the number one thing that people ask you about when you're out on the campaign trail?
They asked me about axing the tax. They want to know about axing the tax. And then they talked to me about mental illness and addiction. Wow. It's really touched a chord with people. And I never used to talk about my family, not that I was ashamed or embarrassed, but it's painful. And during COVID, when I saw what was going on with all of us, I thought, maybe if I talk about it, it gives other people permission to talk about it. And then that's how we start to remove the stigma, and that's how we start to get things done. So, I think as a result, that has happened to a certain extent. The more we all talk about it, the more we realize we all have so much in common. It's not something that's bad or horrible. It's something that just happens because we're not perfect. Right. We are who we are. We get the genes we get. My daughter says she got all the bad genes in the family. And, I said, it's not the hand you're dealt, it's how you play it. But we have to give people good cards to play. We got to help those people that are struggling.
And what is the, setting aside axe the tax as the already given, after that, what do you envision as being the number one thing that you can do for the state of Indiana?
Well, I want to boldly lead Indiana into the future. I am the only candidate that has the experience at the local level, at the state level, in the executive and legislative branches, that understands how government works and knows how it can work better to help Hoosiers. And it's why I want to axe the tax. I want to create a lifelong education system where we are focused on 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Let's teach children how to think, not what to think. And then I want to totally reform education and take the 5 agencies that deal with workforce training or education, consolidate them in one, where now everybody's on the same page, everybody's on the same software system, working together to make sure that every child's prepared for that next step upon graduation, whether it's enlistment, employment, enrollment, or apprenticeship. Let's look at strengthening our families and our communities, whether it's helping those that struggle with mental illness and addiction, whether it's protecting our farmland and land near our military bases from foreign adversaries, whether it's treating the fentanyl dealers for the murderers they are, and keeping those deadly drugs and human trafficking out of the state of Indiana. It's about standing up for the parents who care for their severely disabled, medically complex children. When the state made a $1 billion mistake with FSSA in December, and then they said, well, we're going to make up for that lost money by cutting services to parents that take care of their children that are severely disabled. And I'm, Johnny, not talking about children that go outside and play and come in and eat. I'm talking about children that have tracheotomies, that have feed tubes, that are on ventilators, that are nonverbal. Children that need someone to care for them 24/7. And yet we are looking at cutting services and cutting funding to those families. At the end of the day, we're going to be judged by how we care for the most vulnerable among us. Is that how we want to be judged? I don't think so. And then I want to totally modernize state government. I want to downsize our agencies. I want to remove unnecessary rules and regulations. Let's have outside independent audits of these agencies so we can figure out how we can run government better and more efficiently and more cost effectively. And then let's make government transparent and accountable. People should feel like their government's working for them, not that they're working for their government, And I am the only one that is proposing cutting taxes for Hoosiers. I am the only one that's saying that those Hoosiers that struggle with mental illness and addiction will be a top priority. I am the only one that knows how we can make government work better for Hoosiers. That's why I want to be governor. It's because I care deeply about Indiana. I care deeply about Hoosiers. I want to be in a position to make their lives better.
Outstanding. And once the election's over with, the one thing I want to do with you is I've been really involved in programs to try to bring down the recidivism rate in our prisons, and that's a passion of mine. So I do some prison ministries program called Kairos that has been very effective. Doing a weekend of kind of intense Christian education to men inside. But the other thing was doing job skill and life skills teaching inside the facilities, and taking guys who have 60 to 90 days left on their sentence and teaching them how to handle tools and how to get along in the workplace, because a lot of those guys just simply don't have the skills. They don't understand how to communicate to somebody who's their superior in the workplace. And when they don't understand that they don't have the communication skills, they become frustrated, and that crime just continues to cycle. So that's one of my passion areas, and I would love to show you more about that.
I would love to learn more. It's interesting. I was visiting with the Carpenters Union, spoke to their membership up in Greenfield a couple days ago, and some man in the back of the room asked a question and said, what are you doing? What can the state do better for people that are in the Department of Correction to prepare them for success? Because we have 100,000 jobs that are unfilled. Let's get these individuals prepared for the workforce so that they can help not just us in terms of filling jobs, but they can help themselves. And they can have that self-worth and be able to support themselves and feel like they don't have to go back to a life of crime and addiction.
Just before COVID, I was able to tell guys there are 80,000 manufacturing jobs in the state of Indiana that need people to fill them. Now, of course, COVID kind of collapsed all of that, and that job training became a little bit more difficult to kind of sell to the incarcerated individuals. But the fact is, everything's coming back now, and we're back at that point where, if you just keep a guy from going back.
Think how much money that saves
Oh,
the
exactly.
taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
Much less changes that person's life and their family's life.
Exactly. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing more and connecting with you.
Great.
After the May 7th primary.
After the May 7th
Please
primary.
vote for me in the Republican May 7th primary.
And I also want to put in a very strong word here for voting, period. And when you go vote, don't fall for the if somebody's telling you why not to vote for their opponent, something's not right there. Okay. Make sure that you're voting for candidates who are giving you a reason to vote for them. Pay attention to what they believe and to their character, because sometimes those ads tell you a little about the character of the person who's placing those ads. So just be aware of that. There has also right now been a new campaign that's been launched in the state of Indiana that is encouraging Democrats to vote in the Republican primary. What this does is it makes it all that much more important that the Republicans get to the polls and vote. Simple as that. We've got to do it because now Democrats are being encouraged to kind of gum the works up, and we can't afford that. So make sure that you, regardless of party, make sure that you vote and vote for the party that most fits your ideals and beliefs. And the dust will settle from there. All right. Suzanne, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Johnny. It's good to be here. We've worked a long time to be able to make this happen.
Exactly.
And let's don't make it so long next time.
You're very right. Yes. And thank you for joining us for This Week in Evansville. Remember to subscribe, hit the like button, share some comments with us. We've been getting great comments lately on some of our shows. We really appreciate hearing from you. So do all of that and let other folks know that we're here with This Week in Evansville.